What is going on, you guys? It's your boy treading on taco time here, and we are back with episode 128 of the video game therapy series. Had a rough couple days. It's one of those things where you just keep getting. I mean, most people would probably call it unlucky, but I have a propensity to. I mean, again, I don't really think this is a bad thing either to try to, not to try to find ways to blame myself, but at least see where I might have been responsible. Now, there's certainly, obviously, with hindsight, you can kind of always justify your way, your way into thinking like some things could be your fault, barring like, complete, like, getting struck by lightning. There's almost, you have to be quite the gaslighter to convince yourself that it's your fault that you got struck by lightning. It's kind of almost similar to, have this. Have this in some states. I know, like if you get into a car accident, um, like it's either like no fault or at fault states. Where I think in no fault states, like you existing at all makes it like 0.01, like 1% your fault or something like that. Whereas you could have had like you could have just had a parked car in a parking lot and somebody came in and crashed your car. In some ways, you existing at all is kind of your fault. So that's kind of the way that I tend to be sometimes, especially if things are going bad. I just kind of find ways that, all right, well, assuming it is my fault, what could I have done differently? And it most of the time it is a good thing. It doesn't often hurt me to self criticize or at least self analyze. Criticism isn't always part of it. Sometimes it's good, I suppose, in theory. But I guess at times when things are going poorly, or at least you're not just getting things aren't going well, whatever that might be. Just a string of bad luck. It tends to devolve into I guess big bouts of malaise or melancholy where you're not feeling too high on yourself because you just think everything's your fault and you're just fucking everything up, which is fine. Like I said before, there are times where like everything you touch just turns to poop, and then now you're kind of wading through shit trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. And it's I don't know. The other thing to think about, you know, at least thing not to think about things that I think about is, it's especially in like religious circles, you often see like, I guess bad times, and again, whatever you want to attach to bad times. Maybe that's, you know, maybe it's always financial for you. It's always personal. It's always whatever. Some people tend not to, or it's always health related or something. Some people tend to somehow avoid certain facets of things. Some people never have health problems. Some people never have financial problems or something. So I guess depending on how whatever your cards were dealt, you may not empathize with certain problems and don't empathize a lot with others, which I think is kind of flawed in some sense. Like if you only ever empathize with people with medical problems, especially with I see this with like people with financial problems where like people who have money, who have always had money and have never I guess gotten screwed financially. They've always been like, well, you could have done this X Y Z to like work yourself out of. That's equally as unhelpful as being like if somebody gets like a uncontrollable gets cancer or something. It's like, well, you ate a Pop Tart that one time. That's probably why you got cancer. It's like, well, I mean, that's not helpful. And it's like, on some levels, I suppose if you're 500 pounds, there's probably a long period of time where you continually made bad decisions. But there are plenty of people through no fault of their own who get stupid medical problems that they now have to deal with the rest of their life. It wasn't as a result of Pop Tarts or not exercising or something. Now you can always gaslight them into thinking it was their fault, but that's not always the case. And same with like financial problems. Some people have never had money, their families never had money, and of course they like got unlucky and now they have like no money or something. And it's easy to look at that from a place of like having money or at least having access to something and being like, well, you're an idiot. You could have done this. It's like, well, you should have just done a crypto rug pull and then you'd been fine. But it's like it's hard for you to empathize with that because you've never experienced this like, you've never not had money at all and like no one you've known had money. You've always had like enough of a fallback for you not to empathize with this. So regardless, I'm just going to categorize all these periods of bad times as periods of bad times, whatever, whether that be medical or, interpersonal, even with that, like some people who've like always, you know, had girlfriends and stuff or, significant others or whatever it is that, whatever your orientation is, doesn't really matter. People who've always had that don't empathize with people who are like, I mean, I'm having trouble with, meeting people or whatever. It's like, well, you're an idiot. Just go outside. take a shower or something, drink water. And, as if that, like, but people who've never struggled with that have no, no empathy or no understanding of that. And so they kind of just relate it. They keep it within that realm without realizing that, to them, what might be as difficult as, getting a girlfriend or something might be the same as you getting on your, feet financially, or, taking care of your health or going to the gym or something like that. So everyone is dealt with their own cards, and, in these different facets of life and existence. And different people struggle on different fronts. Some people, um, you know, their whole life is a struggle against their health, that kind of axis, where other people, their health is always fine, but it's just always the money that's the problem, or it's always the people that's the problem. And, and people can have varying degrees of empathy with each, but regardless, bad times are still bad times. So anyway, um, especially in religious circles, you kind of see, I guess some people relate to bad times as like, these are like tests, like cosmic tests. And it is maybe sometimes comforting to think of it in that way, but, uh, it's hard to know. Is this a test, or am I just getting fucked over? Like, is it like, am I supposed to, like, put on a brave face and have resolve? And I guess you don't really know, and, and you can't really know if it's like, if it is all going to be okay, and I tend to just kind of have this, blind and kind of, I guess, illogical faith that things will be okay, whatever that, and okay might even be that, you kind of change your standards on living, and you change your standards on you know, what's a happy life, which is kind of a sad reality to face, I suppose, in the moment, that like, oh, okay for you is going to be lowering your standards to a point where, maybe it is for you, okay for you to be, to live alone and die alone or whatever. And that's going to be like your version of okay, as you kind of coming to peace with that. But I suppose peace is peace, and it doesn't really matter whether or not your peace is, achieving everything you've dreamed of, or just, I guess, stop dreaming, which is sad, I suppose, to say to some people, but that might even be their version of peace. And so to that end, things might be okay, really. And if that really is what it is. But, even I suppose the young kind of idealist in me doesn't want to think of it like, as in like you're going to lower your standards and everything's going to be okay in that sense. But I guess during times of trouble, you want to kind of at least try to make yourself feel better, and it's easy for other people. And I never found this comforting at all ever when other people external to my situation, who might be ignorant of all the details, or just don't know the specifics of it, are like, oh dude, everything's gonna be totally fine, you got nothing to worry about. And you're like, well, it's easy for you to say, and it is easy for them to say, but I guess what else are they supposed to say, right? You don't really. I guess the what's even worse than the friend that's going to tell you it's going to be okay, even if they don't mean it or they don't know, is the friend that tells you it's not going to be okay, and that you're fucked and you're screwed and there's nothing you can do about it and you should give up or something. Which is not the friend you want to have either. I suppose I'd rather have the friend who's kind of the fake optimist, or the even the optimist, the unwarranted optimist, because there's plenty of people that have optimism that's not really grounded in reality, and most people might call that delusion. But while there is might be comforting in like the realism of like a pessimist or a cynical thought, it's often not what you want to hear when things aren't going well. You have a terminal cancer, and someone's like, "Dude, you're going to be totally fine." You kind of want to hear that versus like, "Yeah," or versus like, "Dude, you're going to die in 6 months." You have no chance of getting out of this. Like it's stage 4 or whatever. Whatever it is. Um, you don't really want to hear anything from that person. That person's not really helpful. Regardless, it does kind of all boil back to perspective, on things. And like I said before, the person who kind of, I guess, embraces inceldom, or whatever, in terms of the person who's struggling, on the basis of a relationship. Uh, them kind of accepting that, I guess, no partner is their partner, themselves are really all they're ever going to have. Um, I suppose it doesn't matter whether or not what their version of success is that they finally accept. And then some people, maybe the people that I suppose won't be successful on that front are ones that refuse or can't accept their I guess their newfound fate. So either coming to peace with what your fate is, or what your life ends up being, or eventually achieving whatever it is that that you want, again, however reasonable or unreasonable that might be, are kind of the two avenues. So I suppose it might also just come down to some balancing act between what you realistically, not even realistically, but what you conceivably might be able to accomplish, even if things do turn in your favor, and what things might not be. And maybe the larger societal issue that we're facing now is that there is maybe a larger discrepancy between what might be, again, even conceivably possible with people's futures and things, and what they're kind of expecting their life to look like. And I think everybody as children has been sold on some kind of idealistic future, through whether it's their parents or through the media that they consume, or the school system, or however people got their beliefs and intentions about how they're going to spend their life. You know, again, not to be the cynic of a group, but some people spend their life in prison, and if your successful life is just coming to peace with the fact that you're a prisoner for the rest of your life, then that is the case. And you've seen, maybe you haven't seen, but there are people that maybe commit heinous acts of violence or crime in some sense, with these kind of delusions of grandeur that they're gonna, I don't know, marry a celebrity or win the lottery or something. And no amount of believing that really will ever make that true. And maybe, for one person ever that's ever existed, that might actually come to fruition. But for everyone else, they're just going to rot in prison and die. And they'll die having never really come to peace with their ambitions. And, while, most might call them a fool, they still were, I guess, striving humans nonetheless. They just didn't really calibrate their, external reality to their internal expectations. So it's really might all be what, I guess, a happy, or a not even a happy, but a satisfying life experience might be, is simply a calibration between your internal expectations of things and your external realities. And I guess people are often quick to call themselves experts of the external reality, and then uh, consequently are giving you advice on how to recalibrate your internal expectations to that. But ultimately, what I think, closer to the truth is there is really no meter of what the external world is capable of giving you. You really don't know. And I guess people that can get inconceivably lucky, and that, again, maybe statistically won't be you, but it has to be somebody, and it will be somebody. And it's not that, and the people that never have, I guess, high expectations, aren't even really the ones buying these, like, I guess, supposed like lottery tickets, so to speak. So if you think about it like a lottery, not to say it is all luck based, because I kind of subscribe to this ideology where you have to do enough, and I suppose I hate to use uh, this saying, but you got to work hard enough, I suppose, to get lucky, and to, I guess, be around enough and kind of survive long enough to get lucky. Not survive in the literal sense, but survive in the sense where you have to be in the right places, and, I guess, surround yourself with the right people, and do all the right things. And, again, work, quote unquote, hard enough to get lucky. But the people that don't ever have any higher ambition of things they don't even buy the ticket, to supposedly get lucky. Um, and I suppose everyone gets kind of a degree of a ticket, but giving yourself, a largest enough ticket to get lucky, and playing the game is really all you can do. And the people that are true naysayers that don't, never buy that ticket, or all they do is kind of try to ground themselves in the realism and they kind of abstract the animal world into this, like, death. Everything's a death cult, and you're all just going to die, and it's all about, like, this fatalist. Nothing's going to work out statistically. Everything's against you. While that might be, like, you might have more data to back that up, is that really that doesn't really help you in your endeavors, right? I think the utopianists, while not even utopianists, but the idealists, were saying, well, whatever your dream is, keep working towards it, and you'll eventually achieve some version of it that might be satisfying enough to you, right? They ultimately are more helpful on your journey than the ones that might simply just trying to get you to tune down your expectations on things, because your expectations can't ever get low enough, right? And I think if you're someone who maybe higher had expectations, and then you're starting to try to wind down, and then you kind of accelerate your your wind down of your expectations, and you're now just kind of expecting nothing, and you don't really. I don't think that attitude is conducive to doing a lot. Now, if you're a highly functional yet cynical person, that's one thing. But I think most people, and I'd put myself in this category, the worse I feel and the more cynical I become about the world, and, I guess, what happens with my future, and the future of the world, the more cynical I become, the ultimately, the less, I even use this word, like, productive I would be at all, in terms of what I could accomplish or what I can do. And again, I understand that a lot of what people want to accomplish and the goals that they pursue are statistically very unlikely, and maybe ill-advised in a lot of senses. It's almost like, um, I guess sports is probably a really good way to look at this. It's like, pragmatically, any 20 odd something running around the minors or indie ball or, the G League in basketball, the prudent advice, if you were their very concerned, deeply concerned aunt, would be to give it up and get a job, and that's kind of what, they might be told by a lot of people in their family. And it isn't that they're not wrong even. It's like, again, pragmatically and statistically, it's unlikely that, three point guards in a row will get injured and you'll get called up and and that you'll do well and you'll stick and you can be this, the big leaguer, the NBA star that you want to be. While that is statistically unlikely, again, you participating and doing it and deciding and giving up on the safe job to, again, roll that lottery ticket, it is you, again, I guess, buying a larger share of your lottery ticket and increasing your chances. And somebody in your position that has to happen to somebody, and it does happen to people. It's not like you're kind of wishing on, like, an apocalypse, which hasn't ever happened, I suppose, unless you're like the dinosaurs or something. If you're betting on an apocalypse that has never happened, then again, I would say that you probably are being pretty stupid. But like, you betting on, like, again, a few people getting injured and you kind of getting lucky, being in the right place at the right time with your sport or whatever, that has happened and it happens a lot. And people love this like underdog story, and it's common. It's happened hundreds of times, and it'll happen again. Tom Brady was the last pick in the draft, and now he's a Hall of Famer. There's probably hundreds of other people that have had, you go back 6 months, and the best advice their family or anyone could give them is give up, get out of this. You're an idiot. You're wasting your time. And there are people that don't take that advice and think it'll work out, and it does screw them over. And maybe the advice they should have took was to give up, but I would have never faulted them at all ever for trying, given that maybe it was not certain failure, but near certain failure. That's what they wanted to do, and that's ultimately how to live your life. I think the worst way to live is to, maybe to take their advice. Not the worst way, but a bad way to live, and one that I wouldn't advise, would be to take this, pragmatist advice and give up, and then spend your whole life like kind of, kicking yourself, thinking, well, damn it, I could have given it a shot, or I shouldn't have given up so early, or why did I do this? You see this in old people all the time, where they have this, unrequited dream of, maybe it's sports, maybe it's something totally different. Maybe it's, they wanted to be an actor, but they decided an accountant was safer. And then there's kind of, they're a miserable accountant. And sure, they're like, you're never going to be the best accountant in the world if you didn't, if you truly didn't want to be doing that. And so it doesn't make sense. Like, you're only ever going to be like, a half, okay, or even a lousy accountant if your heart was never in it and you wanted to be, you wanted to write anime or something or whatever it is that you want to be doing with your life. It doesn't matter. I have no judgment on that. I suppose as long as it's not, I guess, lethal to other people. People should be doing whatever they want. I think even there was I don't know, I forgot which philosopher. I can't ever, I can't always keep track, but they say even the best life is to even just to pick something and fail at it. If it is to be a writer, and you even of the odds and the likelihood of being a successful writer is slimming down lower and lower and lower, and then it's maybe it's like a 2% chance at this point. Again, any pragmatists or anyone who's interested in being practical and being just around for longer and kind of surviving is not going to give you the advice of trying. But ultimately you're gonna hate yourself if you don't, right? And even if it is, maybe even with that, like with writing, for example, if you decide to roll the dice and you want to have at least given it enough of a shot to where you're okay giving up. You know what I mean? So it's different. It's like maybe telling the 33-year-old player in the G League that that just broke their ankle for the fifth time. If it's almost like if they know on their operating table that, like, okay, that was it, and I've kind of exhausted myself, and I'm okay telling stories of the G League for the rest of my life. I think it's up to them to really tell them to for them to be okay and kind of have this death almost of their desired career. But I think doing it prematurely or just if they're unsure, they have kind of this like unfinished business per se. I think it's bad to go through with life without finishing the business, right? So if you have this dream and you are unsure of whether you're always going to be unsure whether or not you should have given it another chance. I think you should do it until you truly are like, all right, I'm fucking done. I'm not. It's not happening, and I'm okay with that. And I've accepted that as my fate. I'm not. I'm not going to be left wondering every afternoon, like, shouldn't I have tried? I could have, you know. So it's kind of, I don't know. You finish the business is really what this boils down to. So, and no one really is ever going to know that except for you. So whatever the dream is that you're trying to accomplish, you need to finish that dream. So, um, I don't know. Uh, so I don't know. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but that's kind of I guess that's my blue pilled advice for you today. So hopefully that's not, I don't know. It comes at a good time for you, maybe. Um, so I saw this clip of Zuckerberg talking about friends, and to no one's surprise, the plan for a lot of the people in this technocratic circle is for your, what should be your actual meat friends, aka other humans that you have awkward conversations with and who piss you off from time to time and who are sometimes unreliable, give you bad advice, or maybe even screw you over and backstab you in some way. These people that, uh, who all are faulty. I'm not saying that's like perfect to have bad friends or whatever. And it's, for the most part, I've been good. I have good friends that don't backstab me and stuff. But other people in other situations might have, might deal with that. But of course, Zuckerberg's idea and other tech people is to replace these people with AIs who are going to, in the way I see this going is for people to trap themselves in, what might be the most powerful echo chamber of all time, right? Because we already kind of know how sycophanty and how like agreeable. Again, agreeable to a fault is an understatement, I think, in terms of these AI bots. They will, if you were convincing enough to them, they will tell you anything that you need to believe. So I see this, on the worst cases, being friends with these potential terrorists and turning them into terrorists in the sense where they, if they get a hold of an uncensored model and, are talking to it about, I don't know, how, some class of people is controlling everything. I could see very quickly that going off the rails and it being a serious problem. Now I guess the techno optimists' rebuttal of that is like, well, we just need models that are censored and models that can control people's behavior. It's like, do you hear what you're saying? You want people, it's. I think if your best friend is this, censored, sanitized model who you talk to and share all your secrets and stuff with. Of course, that's the idea because that gives them all the data in the world to work with and gives them very of course it's for advertisers to start and maybe there's even I'm hoping there's at least an evolution beyond advertising because it is just kind of boring, right? Where we take all this data about a person and then all we're like the pinnacle of how we use all this information is just like, all right, well, will you buy this piece of plastic? This like, I don't even know what people are buying anymore. What about like a steering wheel cover, or just whatever like weird, pointless accessory that people are buying. Like that's the point. That's really why we're doing all this. We're not even like trying to build. I guess some businesses are trying to build like this artificial general intelligence, but for the most part, the most like I guess closest to I guess the actual functioning of humans is we're just trying to sell them stuff or whatever. Like it's the immediate business use case for all of this data collection, which again should be illegal and should be frowned upon socially and should be ostracized. These companies and technologies, that is. The whole point is to sell them junk, right? And whoever will give the company, the data company, money for information on who to sell what junk to and when, right? That's like this whole point, or when we should tell them to gamble their last $5 of their paycheck. That's all. This data is all. It just seems like a very, not even primitive, just very insulting use of all of this advanced technology. And a computer science student goes and studies data structures for 10 years and learns all about these new reversing linked list and all this so we could tell John, who's a blue collar truck driver, to gamble his paycheck right after he loses a third of it. you know, that's really basically all we're trying to do with all of this. With all of this ingenuity, we use it for, frankly, the most retarded purpose, imaginable. In my opinion, of course, if you're a economist who believes in the GDP overall kind of thing, maybe you have a different opinion, but still, that's kind of the way I view it. Is it's very, again, primitive is almost not even an insulting enough word for the desires we're trying to cater these people to. But I see the echo chambers that would result from having AI friends that, either one, they're uncensored and will only work to make your views more extreme. If you're like, well, I hate women or something. It's like, well, I agree, women are bad. Like, all it's gonna do is just gonna agree with you, and that's if it's uncensored. If it's a censored model and a sanitized model, then it's gonna be, I mean, like, well, maybe women aren't that bad. Oh, by the way, have you heard of True Moo's new orange milk or something like that? I don't even know what they were selling anymore, but it'll just be laden with some form of ad, or like, I heard betting can actually help lower misogyny. Gambling is a great reduces racism by 20% or something. Whatever it is that this LLM is going to tell you. Again, to not only help its bottom line, because that's kind of the whole point of these products, but to also kind of, I don't know, be the ultimate gaslighter into believing whatever you want to believe, or you want, uh, you know, not even that you want to believe this. I don't think people who are, suppose someone is legitimately racist, I don't think it's that they desire, they're like, I want to be racist. Maybe they do. I don't know. But I think it's more about like the their environment that they're in, and what they've experienced and what they believe. And I think an LLM generating things to try and, I mean, it'd be hard to kind of I guess, again, unless it's kind of a sanitized model, that has to make money somehow. It's not like it's a free government sponsored open source model. It'll find a way to, I guess, embed desirable behaviors in its subjects. Um, that I don't think we have the sufficient understanding of human psychology to be able to control or to manipulate to the degree that we think we can, right? So really, that might boil down to our kind of limited understanding of psychology, and I guess to a larger extent maybe the human philosophy. Like, how do humans even generate philosophical ideals? How do they have, where do virtues of humanity come from? Right? We see kind of themes throughout, throughout all the philosophers. Self-reliance, reciprocity, kind of this golden rule is a very prevalent philosophical idea. But where do these come from? And then not only like knowing the origin or the mechanics of why that might be a good philosophical thing, but then how do you manipulate that via interaction with an AI based model, which I think is a problem that is not only like technically difficult to unless you're just locking them in a room and having them talk to AI all the time, but is just we lack even the theoretical understanding of how that might work. It's not like it's a very logistical problem where it's we need to get people to the moon, we need to have a launch, a rocket that launches this much force or whatever. It's we're dealing with things that are highly unquantifiable, or very difficult to quantify, or even the quantifications are all very loose abstractions. It's not like we can kind of we have the 5-factor model for psychology, but to act like that is truly the representation of like the brain, like as if there's like you know variables encoded in our synapses and things, and those are being adjusted in real time. It's not true. There's no numbers, hard coded or floating around in our brain. We've simply put numbers and we've assigned numbers to certain things, in a computer that's supposed to represent what the brain does. But ultimately, there's no, like I even talked about before, like math isn't real in that sense. Math is an abstraction on the world. And that's not saying it's inaccurate. It's just not the actual world. You can't conflate the abstraction for the real thing. And there's even this there was this video where it's this I think it was Heidegger or somebody, or Hegel. They were warning about the kind of the hyper real, and I think again, what that means, in again my kind of digested layman's version, is what's becoming real now is not what is actually real, but what can only be represented. So if it's not like, suppose it's not representable by a computer, or it's not representable by let's say like social, or it's not representable in some way that people recognize, then it isn't real, right? So for example, like, let's even think about the concept of like intuition, right? Intuition is not a a concept that is uh, codifiable, right? It's not like I can create a program that has intuition, right? The program will do what I say. It will do whatever it's programmed to do, but it doesn't have, an intuition. Now, unless I program, I create a program that's called intuition, and I have it, react, do A, B, or C. And it's not even, it could even be, again, more complicated than that. You could use neural networks and things. But the idea that neural networks is the same as, and again, it's not like it's a loose approximation, which it might be. It is not the same as a human or biological intuition, right? Even like something as stupid as like a goldfish or a deer that's swimming away, or the deer is prancing away from its predator, codifying that into like some super basic stupid neural network and calling that like the deer's intuition, again, at the very least, is a very lossy abstraction of what is actually going on. The truth is there's tons and tons of and intuitions and things that we aren't even able to draw out of, in the DNA and in the the muscles and things, and whatever, in the brain and the stomach, and the basal nerve, all the things that kind of might combine to have this, this sense of like intuition that, us humans are familiar with, that is unable to be codified, and we can't represent it in, the way culture likes things being represented. Numbers, data, graphs, and applications to then monitor and mutate that data. But and in this like kind of hyper real society, anything that can't be quantified like that, or anything that can't be codified into, this kind of socially acceptable, like, real, is not a real thing. So like this idea of human intuition is not real, and because it isn't conducive to this, the way that we represent ideas and things, uh in society, which, again, I at the very least is probably not an ideal way to go about, I guess, overhauling our society, is to only focus on what can be represented. If things can't be represented in a way that is satisfying to us, thus it's not real. So even like, I'm not advocating here for miracles of God to happen and miracles as a thing that are real, but I think most people don't believe in any kind of miracle, even a statistical miracle, because, like, it's very statistically unlikely, and they use this kind of statistical argument, which, again, is kind of a stupid argument, because even that, if you use statistical arguments for like lottery winners, all of them are statistically, improbable to win. Like the odds are very, very low, but ultimately somebody does win. So that is like, it's not even really not real, because it does kind of follow this statistical, distribution on like one person has to win, or one person should win out of a billion or whatever. So somebody does win. So it's not like, sure, like they were unlikely, but so is everybody else. So things do happen, but even miracles that maybe don't have like satisfying enough statistical information that's associated with it. So, people being cured of some kind of cancer, or, I mean, not, it's not even a bad example, but like just very, very unlikely things happening, if people don't have this very neat, like clean statistical abstraction on what, why that should have happened, or the likelihood of that happening, they're easy to dismiss it as something that isn't real. So even like, I don't know, suppose, Jesus 2.0 comes down and is running around on the water. We would be, because we don't have any statistical frame of reference for anything like that, we would be easy to say, well, that's not real. That's a fake thing, or that's a fake video. And again, I'm not saying that. Whoops, my recording went out. Anyway, what I was saying is, if like there was a Jesus 2.0 that was walking across water, and since we don't have any, even statistical, which is only one way of looking at things, by the way. Stats is not the end all be all way of representing, even likelihoods, but the things that happen. It's not all like a statistical probabilities. I mean, technically it is, because it's an abstraction on things, but it's not like we're able to adequately give you the percentage of, X and Y things happening. Um, but that doesn't mean that it isn't, it's not a real thing. I think people are quick to say, well, because using that logic, in the pre-scientific era, anything that maybe we would have had a scientific explanation for now, that they couldn't explain at that time, they would have, again, they thought it was real, but they conjured it up to like demons and things. They assigned these statistically unlikely, not even that, they assigned unexplainable events to deities, whereas now we might assign unexplainable events to unrealities, which I think is the true difference. Whereas, like, if something happens today and somebody isn't able to at least give a scientific, rough explanation or a likelihood or something that, again, kind of quells our very rational mind, we're immediately going to say, well, it's not a real thing. It was a lie. It was fake. It was whatever. Like it's not a real thing. Whereas, even in the days of burning witches, when they didn't really have a scientific process that was, half decent, they would just say, oh, well, it's the gods are angry with us, which, again, I'm not saying is a healthier way to go about living, but at least it's not denying the reality of something that might have happened, right? Where I think now it's almost expected that if things aren't uh, neatly explainable, it's difficult to even justify their existence, which is tough for even for a scientifically minded society that values science very highly. It's not like it is able to answer everything, and I think we need to keep that in mind. That even things that people might assume are very godly things. Maybe there are, and not even maybe there are scientific phenomena we're unable to completely explain, to a satisfying extent. The human brain being one of them. But to say that it's not real, or the sense of intuition isn't real, or it's just like, or just being certain that it is like, it's just a that's just different weights on the matrix, or weights on the the neural network that's inside your brain, like assuming that is like the complete explanation and then kind of leaving it at that, I think is wrong. And I'd almost rather have people assigning the kind of that unexplainableness to a godly deity, because at least there's some reverence for that, whereas like assigning it to a statistical insignificance or irrelevance, I think is just arrogant, right? In my opinion. So even like the sense of intuition that we wouldn't be able to codify, or that we wouldn't wholly codify, maybe we have a crappy version of it or something. The developers have just been like, well, it's not important. That part isn't important. There was even an interesting blog. It was a long time ago. There was somebody that was doing the calculus on the size of a large language model, assuming that the brain was entirely like representable through neural networks. So codifying every connection between the mind body connection, and even this even makes just a very simple mathematical argument that even if we were to accept a very reductionist kind of in my opinion limited view of humanity, we would still be left looking at the most powerful computer ever created. Right now, and I know it's not powerful to us in the sense that like I can't go get like a stupid baby and have it you know solve all these complicated, cryptographic, sequences and things. But given the intricacy of our physiological body, with our mind, with our intuitive sense, with our sense of language, and our ability to learn at the speed, and all this different things, if you wanted to, again, construct a giant model that was capable of doing all of that, you would still be looking at a computer, in theory, that is stronger than any computer that we've ever been able to create, and probably will be for a long time. Given the uh, you know, given Moore's law and things like that. Even with things getting much smaller, it's still, again, it wouldn't be a reality for decades and decades to come. And maybe people think that time is inevitable, but they're still left not really appreciating the gravity of, again, the biological computers that we're running around with now. And by the way, that compute power is not like, we have the way our classical computers are set up is for logical thinking, right? The zeros and ones, and even if we paired that with like, again, kind of a quantum thinking that's a little bit more statistical in nature, even if we use that, we're still not really. We're kind of assuming all of this is follows this very, or even statistical or logical abstractions, which again may or may not be the case. But I think reducing it and assuming that we're either right, or assuming that if we're wrong, it doesn't matter, it's inconsequential, I think is the most arrogant opinion you could have. So it's not to say that I'm able to explain or give you a better, justification on what the human brain is, or what's going on, or how do we, codifying intuition in some ways. But I think assuming that it isn't real, or whatever part of it is real is insignificant, I think is silly. I think that's even stupider than kind of assuming it, it's a god that is, it's responsible for it, or all the gods, or some collection of multiple. I don't even know whatever it is that that you might attribute to kind of these unexplainable phenomena to. But I just think at the very least we should try to quell our arrogance in thinking that we're able to codify everything. And it is kind of, I don't know, a little saddening and dangerous to think about the inability to conceptualize things in our current worldview therefore meaning that X, or Y doesn't exist or isn't a real thing or isn't a real phenomenon because we aren't able to explain it. Or then it kind of, or it could boil down to just like attacking the person who said it or something. It's like, well, this person's an idiot. Obviously, they're not. Whatever this story is isn't true because it's an idiot saying it. So why would he believe it? It's like, all right, well, fine. Even if that's like your sound logic, you're still, statistically there is a chance that they, aren't lying about whatever they saw. But I don't know. Um, I guess related to that with I guess the prior discussion on things working out in some way. I suppose it is most helpful, or at least whether you view it as like a coping strategy with life or not, to have a kind of I don't know a more optimistic endpoint on things. So understanding that there are ebbs and flows with life, and things do get don't always have to be difficult. Maybe there are periods of time where things are really good, but there will be and are times of where things just kind of suck, whatever that might be, health wise, interpersonal, I guess financial or social or whatever it is that is causing you strife. To kind of accept this, more optimist viewpoint on things, even if that doesn't follow this very logical thinking. And I think that's also kind of a sin. I think, in my opinion, of modern man is that they are very there's this reverence and this fixation for this like practicality, like this uber practicality where everything has to make perfect sense. Well, that doesn't make sense. And sometimes it is an intuition based thing. Like you hear this a lot from athletes, which again aren't people admittedly know that they're not the smartest people that we have around, but they often like, well, why did you take that shot, or why did you do this XYZ thing? Why'd you throw that stupid pass? And it's like, well, it kind of felt right, and then that's why I did it. Now, was it totally right, or did it work out? And when it works out, they look like a genius, and they're like, this is the greatest player of all time. And when it doesn't, they're like, well, what an idiot. There's no logical reason to be doing this pass. Where it's like, okay, well, that's not the point. Is they don't like LeBron is not thinking and justifying each individual micro decision. It is entirely intuition based game. He's kind of reacting and thinking in ways that are insane, and he's unable to articulate the detail in which, like, it's not like you can explain step by step, like while you're running, like you're thinking about every quad movement and every flex of the hamstring. You're just not thinking like that. You're not. Nobody is, and that'd be totally unnatural. Um, but to then assume that there's like some amount of unnaturality with running or anything else, I think is also silly. So it's just, I don't know. I think there's a certain amount of attribution to things we have to things out of our control that aren't, so not that they're not real or that they're unlikely or they're too unlikely to be real. They should be real and they are real. It's just we don't know and we don't have the answers, right? And I think that's kind of a better position to come from is as a place of humility, or intellectual humility, where we're kind of admitting that there is shortcomings to our ways of analyzing things, and I don't know, there's not answers aren't always there. So anyway, um, yeah, I suppose the other thing that I'll talk about that I think is interesting, there is this. This might also include kind of this realm or these rantings on I guess logical or scientific understanding and things is language, and I guess culture being kind of extension over language, and we use language to describe culture and things. It's the way we communicate, obviously, but I think it has inclusive and exclusive tendencies, meaning that like uh, codification, so using computer systems to abstract or design systems, is very included in our way of communicating, because there's some logic to it, right? But even like language has a certain measure of illogical things too. It's like, why are certain sounds certain ways, like, well, it goes back to the Latin. All right, well, why do they do it that way then? It's like, well, our mouth moves, and so it's like they don't really know, right? It's not, you don't really know why our language evolved the way it did, or why that you can look at it as a gift in some way, or you can look at it however you want, but ultimately we don't entirely know why our language is developed the way they do. There's not a perfectly logical explanation, because then why wouldn't we have consolidated to one language, right? If Mandarin was truly better and was truly more logical in every conceivable way than English or German, why aren't we all speaking Mandarin? It's like, well, people are just stupid, and it's like there's no language that's mathematically better than any other language. Language is developed as a result of our evolutionary process. People don't really question that. But even like our language now, even not even beyond like the actual language, whether it be German or Mandarin or whatever, that even that the words that we use to describe phenomena include certain things. So it is we were inclusive of logical thinking, despite the illogical nature of our language. I would argue, but I think we are exclusive of which again might be related to our other points about unexplainable things. Kind of excludes a certain amount of I'd say ambiguity. And maybe I'd even disagree with that because it does feel like language always has this air of ambiguity, and it's almost interesting to think that, well, as much as we love logical thinking, our language often in poetry and art and things like that make this abundantly clear. We're not following logic most of the time. I suppose if you're always rhyming, then maybe there's a logic to that. But even with rhymes, it's like, uh, I hate to bring the white rapper into things, but Eminem makes things rhyme that again maybe are less logical or illogical, but to say it in that way that makes it rhyme, because these words again by the book don't rhyme, but they can be said in a way and in a rhythm that again both sounds good and makes it rhyme. So there's almost this illogical level to our language as well that isn't really helpful in things. But even excluding things that we may not have words for. So it's well known that there are many languages that include words and feelings and associations. Like German, I think German and Japanese both are again the notable examples I've seen of this, where they have these like there's like these absurd words that are like 40 characters long that describe like a very very specific feeling. It's like the feeling where your friend is walking away and you're sad because you don't know when you'll see them next. It's like a 40 character long word, Scheiden for them, whatever. I'm not even gonna pretend like I know what it is. Not to say that's even a real thing. I'm just making that up. I'm just saying there are a ton of words like that that describe feelings and emotions and things that we certainly know are real, but our language is unable to convey them. And again, it goes back to the same discussion. It's like, well, I'd be amiss to say that that doesn't exist because we don't have a word for it. So it's kind of impossible to codify. We don't have a word in our language that means that. And sure, we might have like a data matrix that correlates to that that mixture of chemicals within the brain, but like that even that is far beyond our level of reasoning. We don't know enough to be able to codify that in any significant or meaningful way. Same with the Japanese. They have lots of again strange words and symbols that mean things that we don't have words for in English. Like the word for it in English is an entire explanation, like I just gave you. Like again, the feeling when your toes are in water and it's the sun is warm on your face or something like that. Like that is like one word to Japanese, whereas to us it'd be an entire paragraph. But like even that, like the paragraph doesn't really do justice to the word, and there's even historical bits and things to the one word that we can't appreciate in the language that we don't speak or understand. And you might say that like, well, computers kind of transcend all of these, this language understanding, because it combines like the difference between that. But I'd also argue that data in different languages doesn't really overlap. Like I'd be curious to see, and maybe this is an interesting like uh, I guess thing to study as like a AI person would be look at models trained on different languages and where they might suppose that like you wanted an uncensored model or something like that. Suppose they found a way to like detect whether or not something came from this certain model or not. Well, suppose you retrain that model on a completely different language base, like Chinese instead of English. Would you still be able to determine whether or not it came from that model or not? Like, would there still be certainty in knowing that this came from that? And even that, we don't even have systems that can detect whether or not it's this came from ChatGPT yet. We have bad ones, but there's false positive and things like that. But there's no perfect hash function that tells you. Um, and even hash functions have collisions, so it's not like you could say for certain that that would be that. Either way, it is interesting to think about the differences in language and how we might relate to different languages. There's words and feelings that we don't have words for, and people write poetry to get to get over that, and people I guess learn other languages to then be able to say those words. But even imagine there are feelings that no language has any word for or any collection of words, right? It's like think about you losing your child or something like that. Your child or your significant other dies, your parents die or something like that. Sadness. Is that really the word that sums up all of that? Even if it's like depression, or even if it's a 1,000-page manuscript on how sad you are and how bad it feels, does it really, does that big body of text and those, ones and zeros really codify like your true feeling of emptiness that you might have in losing, in losing your child or getting run over, whatever it is that happens, is it, do those words really do justice to that loss? No. Same with like, I don't know, suppose your dream is to, I don't know, ride in a boat out on the Black Sea or something like that and put a pirate hat on. I don't know. Suppose you accomplish that and you do that. Is there any manuscript or any set of words or numbers or colors or whatever that would possibly codify that entire feeling of you truly achieving that end? You winning, the NBA finals and making and banking in the three to win the whole thing. Is there any word that can remotely describe that? Or any collection of words or any number of words you would rather? It's like, I just don't think so, right? There are moments in time and moments in your life that aren't you cannot describe them in any, they're indescribable moments. People intuitively know this too. No one's arguing with me about these moments that exist, but I don't think people connect between, okay, this is an indescribable moment, you sharing this time with, the first person, your first kiss, or whatever it is that's significant to you, your first double black backflip if you're a skater or something. um, Moments of loss and joy that, again, we could write a manuscript about it, but would that truly convey the feeling that you have? Does it really do justice to the, whatever emotion is that you're dealing with after that point or that you've experienced? And anyone who, they immediately say no. It's not like there's anything that'll ever compare to, you know, the game seven shot or, whatever it is that, we're trying to describe here. And people know that, but they don't really connect that with, I guess language being and codification of our experiences being a limited way of looking at things, right? Maybe large language models can't do all of that ever for the rest of time and never, and completely describe everything always. Like it just won't be able to. It's just not possible. Um, Again, because we never really accept it as being one to one. Whereas other things might not be as big of like could a AI beat me at Microsoft Excel? Probably, yeah. Probably can write better code than me. Whatever, great, it wins. But like, will it ever be able to experience, the joy of I don't know, seeing your child for the first time or something like that? It's like no, sure, it can write as many essays as it wants about it, and it can paint AI generated pictures and things like that. But will it ever know what that is like? Besides what we've how we've described it. But again, our descriptions are only abstractions on what's actually happened, and is not the thing itself. Right? We can't conflate you having a child and that experience, and or seeing your friend walk away despite not knowing whether you're going to see them. Whatever German word that is. Is that word the same as that feeling itself? Or is that, essay the same as that feeling itself? No, I don't think so. So anyway, that's just my opinion. I suppose if you're more of a materialist and reductionist, maybe you disagree and think that they are one and the same. And I guess the words can't adequately describe the feelings and things. But I think there's a certain disconnect between what we've written down, what we'll say and think about these things versus what we can actually codify into reproducibility. In terms of reproducing it using an AI. But anyway, I'll cut it off there. My recording cut out, so I'll just try to merge these two clips together. Anyway, peace out.